I don't often tell lies, but when I took the oath to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa, I was lying. I've blown up years later by a bomb. That was a high point of my life. I got through it, and I discovered it's bang, 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 banging for 10 minutes and 20 minutes silence. We could have gone on fighting. We would have won in the end. We wouldn't have been in South Africa. We would have inherited a ruined country. It's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer.
Spread the fire. Welcome back to SMWX, and today I am extremely honored to be joined by a freedom fighter, an acclaimed author, a renowned jurist, and a South African titan, an icon, Justice Albie Sachs, who's very kindly allowed me to call him Judge Albie. Thank you so much for joining us on SMWX.
Well, I'm looking forward to it because you're sharp, you love ideas, you engage. Let's go for it. Absolutely.
Can you tell us a bit about your early life and what influences led you to the path of law and activism which have so characterized your life?
I mean, looking back, I didn't stand a chance. My name, Albert, I was named after Albert Nzula, who was an African trade unionist, member of the Communist Party, who died shortly before I was born. My parents had enormous respect for him, and his passing, they were bleeding, and so they named their first child Albert after him. A couple of years pass. I have a younger brother, and my mother's saying to us, tidy up, Uncle Moses is coming. And Uncle Moses wasn't Moses Cohen or Moses Cantor, it was Moses Kutani. And he was the General Secretary of the Communist Party. My mother was his typist. That was the term used in those days. So I grew up in a home where it was natural. My mother, a white woman, would not only be working for a black man, but have enormous respect for him and want to produce high-quality work for him. And that became, if you like, normal for me and my little brother. And that world outside, that was racist, was abnormal, was kind of wrong. So it wasn't as though something happened to me, I saw somebody being beaten up, and I said, no, enough already. Then World War II, fight against Nazism and anti-fascism, anti-Hitler, anti-racism, and the Red Army playing a huge role, ultimately a decisive role in it, and little white boys, growing up imagining they're going to be fighting the enemy and flying Spitfires to shoot down the Messerschmitts and bombing Berlin, and very masculinist and very militarist, but it was an anti-Nazi kind of a project. And we learnt about Battle of El Alamein involving South African troops, but Stalingrad very much, the siege of Leningrad very much. And that's the world I'm growing up in. And yet part of me, and I'm even leaving out the bit, my dad, Albie Sachs, General Secretary of the Garment Workers Union, leading strikes, often in the newspapers, fighting the bosses, fighting the government, sometimes fighting his spouse and sometimes fighting his children, but a militant, romantic, active, deep voice, a passionate person, a personality. And part of me is saying, okay, Mom, okay, Dad, that's your world. I want to go my own way. So I was a dreamer. I wasn't active as a child. Go to UCT, I'm studying law, I'm not active. I played a bit of cricket, I did a lot of mountain climbing, I read a lot of poetry. And then, strangely enough, it was poetry that was the trigger for me. I'm told by my mother, Ace Krieger, an Afrikaans poet, is going to give a lecture. And we'd once stayed in Ace Krieger's bungalow in Clifton. She would have a kind of basement with the two little kids separated from my dad. And she knew I loved poetry. And he'd been to Spain towards the end of the Civil War. And he spoke about a Spanish writer, Federico Lorca, who had been executed by the fascist Franco forces at 5 p.m. And a poem by Pablo Neruda, whom I got to learn about afterwards from Chile, a los 5 de la tarde, at 5 p.m, at 5 p.m, and Ace is walking up and down on the stage, and I'm spellbound. And what that did, sees where it linked up, I loved poetry, I loved dreaming, I loved longing for a better world. It linked up that inner yearning that I had with the great public events. And 2 weeks later, or 3 weeks later, I'm signing on to join the Defiance of Unjust Laws campaign. Wow. So people ask me sometimes, why did you bring culture into the struggle? Because I wrote about culture afterward. It was the other way around. It was actually culture that propelled me at that particular stage against the background of parents who were very active activists. Yeah.
It's very interesting. Do you have any memories of Moses Kotane?
Yes, I do. Very genial, very warm, very paternalistic or avuncular, which is absolutely appropriate.
Yeah.
Very tender to my mom. You know, he used to say, Ray taught me to read and write in the night school. Now I'm her boss, with a big smile on his face. And then when I became older, and I'm actually working in the underground party, and now I'm reading about the stories, and oh boy, there were lots of schisms in the party. My dad was expelled, and other leaders were expelled, and this position and that position, the other. My dad expelled for right-wing deviationism, which we learned was as bad as left-wing deviationism. But Moses Kotane was the one who put the national question at the center of the liberation struggle. And he wrote a very famous letter from Cradock saying, our comrades can all debate the German question and about China, but they don't discuss what's happening in our own country. And he said, I'm a native first and then a communist. That shocked them to the core, you know, as though somehow when you become a communist, you cease to be black, white, brown, African, whatever, you know, you're part of the revolution. And his influence was enormous in that sense. And then he found support from people like Michael Harmel and putting the national liberation struggle at the center of the destruction of apartheid, and rather than white workers and black workers unite to overthrow the capitalist state and get a society where everybody has equal rights, the thrust, the push, was national liberation of the African people.
After university, can you tell us about your life in practice and life at the bar? So much of what we know about you comes from your judicial work, your work in activism, but what was it like being at the bar and practicing, and take us into that era of your life while you're still...
Yes, when I think back, I don't often tell lies, but when I took the oath to be faithful to the Republic of South Africa, I was lying. I was a lawyer by day and a revolutionary at night. Yeah. And it's a strange kind of schism. I had such ambivalence about the law. Part of me enjoyed the cut and thrust and the debate and ideas and clients, and could be this case, that case, the other, apartheid not coming into it directly. Another part of me loathed it. It was the epitome of what I would call learned white supremacy, cultivated, and most of the judges were very calm and very thoughtful, and the bar, the advocates, very strong ethics in relationship to the clients and never misleading the court. And I went along with that. I was a real goody, except when I wasn't. And I defied the ethics of advocacy in two respects. The one was I didn't take fees for all the political cases I did. I'd got that from a guy called Lionel Foreman, been advocate, a little older than myself. He was arrested, put on trial for treason, just at the time when I finished my LLB and came to the bar. So I took over his chambers. And I said, Lionel, what discount do you give for political cases?
Yeah.
He said, I don't give a discount. I don't charge. They're in trouble for resisting apartheid. I support them. It made my life so much easier. And I'd say a good 50% of my work fell into that category. Trade unionists going on strike, activists being challenged for not having their passes. Annie Selinga was a very famous women's freedom fighter in Langa who refused to carry a pass. And my phone would ring at 2 in the morning, and Comrade Albie, Comrade Annie's just been arrested. Can you arrange bail? I said, we'd do it in the morning. And all the repressive laws, breaking banning orders, furthering the aims of illegal organizations. So that was one sector of my work. And then, interestingly enough, in 1960, most of my clients were from the PAC. Very active in Cape Town after that big march by Philip Kekana. And I actually saw the march. A very senior Queen's Counsel, he was called, came rushing up to my neighbors, the Queen's Counsel. Have you heard the natives are marching? And normally that person never used the word natives, said Africa, but some of the natives are marching.
Yeah.
And I rushed over to see, and I saw thousands of African men coming down Rowland Street, going to the center of town. My heart was just filled with joy. But I was banned. If I had gone close to it, I could have been sent to jail for joining an unlawful gathering. And I ended up in that trial. The PAC line was no bail, no defense, no fine. So they defended themselves. But 3 ANC people were charged in that matter, and they asked for me. So I was now the lawyer in the court, and I would stand up and say, I put it to you, Sergeant so-and-so, and I'd sit down.
Yeah.
And then Philip Kekana would stand up and say, I put it to you. And then Lawrence Magweba would stand up and say, I put it to you. Clarence Makwetu, I put it to you. I was being cloned.
Yeah.
I was the only lawyer they knew. And they were smart. They were quick. And if I can just mention an awkwardness for me, it's mainly black policemen attending PAC meetings, making notes of the speeches. And that was the basis for a charge of sedition. Now, I want to break them down, but I'm uncomfortable saying, Sergeant so-and-so, you're clumsy, your English is bad, you're making mistakes. You know, part of me, the accused didn't care tuppence. They wanted me to smash the guy, you know, be as rude as possible. Part of me, these are the strange contradictions in South Africa. In any event, then after that, when Concourt was created, a number of the people came to me, and they would come directly to me, and the PAC attorneys said, you know, if you can't come up with fees from somewhere, we can't defend you. So I'm doing it for nothing anyhow. And one case I had something like 43 accused.
Wow.
I'd have to make a list. I don't even have an attorney helping me. And maybe I can get 10 of them off or 15 of them off. Maybe I can get a reduced sentence. The Jewish old aged home was one group. of African men living in the compounds. And the matron said they were such wonderful assistants. The charges were they were going to go out and kill white families. She said, I don't know anything about that. I just know they treat the old women and old men with tenderness and love and care. And when some of them were found guilty, I spoke to them. Anything you want me to say? We're going to go to jail. Magistrate had 3 years maximum. But Mr. So-and-so, he's 60-something, he's got TB. See if you can get him. And that same kind of kindness, and that horrible magistrate, Van Heestien was his name, wouldn't even allow a 60-year-old man with TB, first offense, not even the slightest bit of leniency. And then things got worse and worse. People were being tortured to death. One of my underground co-workers, Luxmot Solwandli and Goodley, his wife comes to see me and she's telling the story step by step. And I want to say there's nothing we can do. The law doesn't allow access to 90-day detainees. And she carries on with the story, it carries on slowly, and she says, and then I saw his body covered in bruises. And he was the first of the detainees to die under torture. So I said, well, at least we can get an inquest, an inquiry. And now it was not a question of keeping people out of jail. It was saving people from the death sentence. It was exposing torture. It was using what space there was. You had some protection in the courts. And I discovered being an advocate didn't protect me from being thrown into solitary confinement.
Right.
I was just thinking of it the other day. I was defending a Mr. Skosana, who was a clerk at the Langa, it was called Native Administration, Bantu Administration, and the charge against him was that he would sell passes. He was actually very popular in the community. He would take risks, but he would enable people, to stay. And we're preparing for the case, and he tells me that he's going to go to church on Sunday, and he's going to go to the Nyanga on Saturday, and he's coming to me. So I said, Mr. Kusana, if you get off, who's responsible? Who gets the credit? He says, it depends. If the person is so confused, the witness, then it's in Nyanga. Any event, the next thing I knew, I went to jail.
Oh, my goodness.
So I felt he got his booty mixed up.
Yeah, exactly. You should have gone back to the Nyanga yourself.
Yeah.
That's
I don't want to make light of it. But so I'm giving you some idea of this double life. Even when I was a student, now I'm becoming politically active. And there's that time, I don't know if you ever had it, you were also born into political families, so you'll identify with some of the points I'm making. Where I'm studying constitutional law at UCT, and the professors are speaking about freedom and justice and equity and rights, and I'm writing the exams and so on, and they loved the law. But they wouldn't fight for justice. They opposed injustice. At night, I'd be taken down to the shanty town. People, they're just candles. You'd see the whites of people's eyes, the whites of their teeth. And people so eager for knowledge. When I talk about history, economics, so on, so forth. And the people hated the law. The law was the van chasing them, people demanding their passes. The law protected the rich, the whites, and oppressed the black people. but they'd give their lives for justice. And that tore me apart more than just racism. You know, the apartheid thing was obvious, unjust, destroy the apartheid legal system. But still, throughout the world, you've got poor people terrified of the law and rich people seeing the law as their friend. And I'm jumping forward a little bit now. It's only when we came to write our Constitution that I found the great phrases of the ages, which had been won in struggle all over the world against despotism, against domination, against slavery, against colonialism, for rights of people. These great phrases of the ages linking up with the passion of the poor, fighting for their rights. And so for me, the constitution writing process wasn't just healing for the country, it was healing for me, Albie, the divided Albie.
Yes. You have this vivid phrase in, I think it's The Strange Alchemy of Life and Law, where you say, in one part of your life, you were studying the law, and in another part, you were an outlaw. I can't remember exactly how you put it, but it's a very vivid phrase. And of course, after this period of practicing at the bar, eventually you find yourself detained and facing the punishment that you were trying to ward off for others. And what are your memories of that tension that you must have been sitting with at that crucial juncture of your life?
I was arrested walking into my chambers, 1 Dorp Street in Cape Town, right opposite the Supreme Court, as it was then called, the High Court. And the next thing I know, I'm locked up. No lawyers, no charge, no court, nothing. In a concrete cube, no contact with family, no contact with the outside world. I felt a rage against the legal system, that this can happen. Not that I, as a lawyer, should be privileged, but it's so flagrant, and they're doing nothing. They're doing nothing. So I felt a violent anger against law in South Africa. On the 27th day of my detention, the station commander comes in with a piece of paper. Now, the only book I'd had until then was the Bible. I grew up in a very secular home. Now I'm reading the Bible and I'm rationing myself. It's my only book. I don't want to get through it too quickly.
Wow.
And it's got these 2 columns. So I'm reading this piece of paper, my eyes going down, but the writing goes across in the Supreme Court of South Africa, Cape of Good Hope Provincial Division, in the matter of Albie Sachs versus Johannes Jacobus Rousseau. It is hereby ordered that the applicant be allowed reading matter and writing material. Wow! The legal system is the most wonderful thing that was ever invented by humanity.
Best thing ever.
Ever since evolution started. And your emotions get very exaggerated. It was terrible, solitary confinement. It's unnatural, inhuman, harsh. And that particular place, I didn't even have a chair or table, I'm spending my life on the floor, and I hear police coming and the door being unlocked, and I get up. I don't want them to see me lying on the ground. So now I'm allowed books, and I say, well, my friends, can send books. Oh, no. They'll have little messages. So I had to write the names of books on a piece of paper, and Constable van Tonder would go to the local library. And I imagine the librarian getting this piece of paper from Constable asking for remembrance of things past by Marcel Proust. In English, I wasn't actually able to read it. Moby Dick I read, an amazing book.
Interesting. Okay.
Don Quixote, by Cervantes, a beautiful, beautiful book. And Cervantes had been in prison. And the second half of the book, I discover, is of this knight knocked down and getting up onto his horse, knocked down again, getting up onto his horse. And that was me, you know. So that saved me. Afterwards, the case went on appeal to the appellate division, and they overturned it. And it was held by local lawyers as the worst decision given by judges, in the sense that they weren't obliged by the law. They were leaning to interpret the law in a way that went against precedent, that they said would aid the police. So I'd been vain enough to think the case of Sachs versus Rousseau will show that little candle burning in the darkness, you know, throughout the world. Instead, it's now offered as the case showing how terrible the judges were. My second detention was much worse. And now Roy Swanepoel is in charge of the team. And he's scathing about the Cape Town security police, who just left me stewing, you know, with nothing happening. And I discovered it's bang, 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 banging for 10 minutes and 20 minutes silence. Then the interrogators go out, and then another team comes in, and they're rotating. Noise, silence, noise, silence, noise, silence. Through the afternoon, through the night, into the morning. I think there's something in my food. I'm overwhelmed with fatigue. And I decide I'd had clients who'd been kept up for 5 days and 5 nights and broken completely. And I decided I'm going to try and manage my breakdown. And I tumble off the chair, and I feel water poured on me. I see all their feet, their shiny black and brown shoes. I'm put up on the chair, and Swanepoel's thick fingers pushing my eyes open, and I fall again. Happens a few times. And then I indicate. So the first 168 days, I refused to answer questions completely. Now I'm going to try and manage what answers I'm giving. And I say, I'm giving the statement under duress. This is what happened. He writes it all down. And then he starts asking some questions. And he says, strange, everybody you mention is either dead or out of the country. And that was true. But now he's very happy. They've broken me. And they'll come back. They'll come back. And he gets me to sign the pages. And then I kind of half notice that he's shuffling them around. And then I feel even more defeated afterwards, that he'd taken out the pages where I describe the interrogation. So it's like a double defeat for me. And that was the low point of my life. I've blown up years later by a bomb. That was the high point of my life. I got through it. I survived. I felt almost joyous, not almost, joyous and triumphant and total conviction. This is now in exile in Mozambique. As I get better, my country will get better. That was now April 1988. And I got better, and now we could start coming back. And then if I can just leap forward a little bit there.
Absolutely.
I'm lying in hospital, feeling generally very chipper, you know. They tried to kill me. I failed. I'm going to make it. We're going to make it. And then I'd wake up maybe 4 a.m, and the painkillers are worn off, and I feel a little bit sorry for myself. And I'd sing Paul Robeson, Negro Spiritual. Paul Robeson was the Mandela of my age, African-American, beloved by progressive people, all backgrounds, all over the world, but severely punished in the United States as being, although he was a football player, a singer, an actor, and he had an LLB from Columbia University, wonderful all-rounder. And the song was, it's me, oh Lord, standing in the need of prayer. It's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. It's not my brother nor my sister, but it's me. I'm feeling a bit sorry for myself. It's not my uncle nor my aunt. It's not my cousin. It's me, O Lord. Then I'd fall asleep and I'd wake up and a cup of tea and I'm tripper again. And then one day there's a letter for me. Now, I don't know if you remember letters. We used to lick the envelopes, and I open it with my left hand, a bit difficult. Don't worry, Comrade Albie, we will avenge you. Signed, Bobby Naidu. Avenge me? We're going to cut off the arms? We're going to blind in one eye? Is that the country we want? If we get freedom, if we get democracy, if we get rights for everybody, that will be my soft vengeance. Roses and lilies will grow out of my arm. And that theme, soft vengeance, became the theme of my life. Being able to return to South Africa on our terms, being able to be part of that surge to get democracy, helping to write the country's constitution. You've been studying law now. You've got to read the constitution made by other guys, me, and others. And then afterwards, being on the court, that's defending those things that so many people were fighting for. And then choosing, being part of the choice to place the Constitutional Court on what's now called Constitution Hill, on the site of the old Fort Prison, where thousands and thousands of people had been locked up for resisting apartheid, men, women, young people, old people. Soft vengeance, and then putting up a beautiful building filled with art and a building that's got radiance and it's affirmative. So it's been, from that point of view, a marvelous journey for me. From, the heaviness that I mentioned early on to the vitality of the work. It's all real for me, but I realize the reality of life for millions of others in this country hasn't been one of, manifest advancement, progress. I think the country has moved a hell of a lot.
One of the things I particularly appreciate about your work and your public comments, and thank you for sharing so much of that here on the channel as well, is that you're prepared to share those moments that must have been so difficult and harrowing for you. And one of the things I find maybe selfishly frustrating is that whenever I speak to freedom fighters who are detained, my own father, people find it very hard to go there and to speak about those moments. What led you and what prompted you to speak about those moments that must be so difficult to return to so often?
I started in the middle of everything. I'd always wanted to be a writer. I'm sure you always wanted to be a writer. But I've become a lawyer and I'm writing legal opinions and they're boring. They're controlled. You exclude the passion, the emotion, the fun, the ambiguity, the contradictions. You can't give half an answer. You can't say maybe when you're writing. So now I'm locked up in solitary confinement, and now I'm beginning to fight back. I'm going to write a book when I come out. I'm going to write a book. So that's part pure ego on my part. That little dream, big dream actually, of a little boy, now a bigger boy. It was partly also hitting back at them. The movement was being destroyed. Our leaders were in jail. Everything banned, prohibited. The one thing I can do. And I wasn't able to carry on in the underground anymore. So I was invited just after I'd been released, going from one house to another house to another house, secret, and I meet Ray Alexander, Comrade Ray, Comrade Albie, we are so proud of you. The next meeting of the District Committee of the Communist Party will be at the usual place, which was up on the mountain somewhere. And I said, Comrade Ray, I can't. I just don't have the strength anymore. I said, when I was detained and I walked along a passageway on the second floor, I felt like throwing myself. Don't you even think of that. Something was crushed. I ran from the center of Cape Town all the way to Clifton, threw myself into the sea when I was released. I looked triumphant, but in fact, something inside. You never get over solitary confinement. So that was kind of very hard. And I started writing the jail diary of Albie Sachs. And I wanted to share with all the other people like me, maybe struggling in Argentina or in Thailand, what it's like. We used to read books about prison, and they didn't help me directly at all. You don't get tips, how to withstand prison better. But it was like turning negative into positive. And so that's my one thing I'm doing, the jail diary of Albie Sachs. And then it was a criminal offense for me to prepare anything for publication. It was a criminal offense for someone to type it, to even be in possession of my notes, let alone the book. The banning orders, these were standard things. Our prison constitution wouldn't allow it. That's why one reason I'm a constitutionalist. A lot of stuff that was normal then. Minister of Justice had powers that couldn't be challenged at all. So I started writing, so this is what it's like, in the present continuous tense, just to give it a flavor. And then the narrative began afterwards. And I showed the handwriting, written notes to Beryl Bloom. Beryl was married to Harry Bloom, a very good author from that time who'd gone into exile. And she said, Albie, that first page is beautiful. From then on, it's boring. So that encouraged me to write in the present tense. And writing in the present tense forced me to remember the emotions, the feeling, not just conveying facts, but the experience of it. And 2 years later, the book came out. It had considerable success. And I felt now I could do it. And then I did a second follow-up book, Stephanie on Trial. That was written in the past tense, very hard book to write. Stephanie, my client, and she'd been beaten up, and we're falling in love in prison. I'm the lawyer. She's sent to jail for a while. She comes out. She says, they're coming for you. That's when they came for me the second time. And we go to England. And I'm going to reread that book now, But then my thesis, Justice in South Africa, and it's basically the legal system, the racist legal system, talking about equality. How did the judges function, 1652 to 1970? I loved being a scholar. I loved going to the libraries. In those days, you photocopied. I had piles and piles, and I'd start different things and make discoveries along the way, read much well beyond what I really needed for my work, enjoying the debates and the discussions, and particularly the South African scholarship then was very lively in London with Marxists, some very hard line, beautiful, pure, hard reasoning, and Jeff Guy, who used to fly a kite and then do African genealogy and the families of the Zulu-speaking people. You couldn't get two more opposed. And then the traditional historians going to colonial libraries and getting lots of facts indeed. Wonderful debates and discussions. A nice part of my life. So lots of books came out afterwards. And each one accompanied me at a certain time in my life. I enjoyed doing it. I enjoyed sharing the emotions. I hate it if I'm sitting eating somewhere and somebody says, "Oh, Albie, what was it like?" Then I'm like, say like your dad. And I remember, as a young teenager now, after World War II, and I'd meet some of the older comrades.
Yeah.
"Oh, Comrade Wolfie, what was it like in the war,
Yeah.
He wouldn't talk. He wouldn't talk. And that I can understand. But in that sense, I'm literally in charge of the narrative.
Yeah.
It's drawing it out and sharing. And I have a sense of joy sharing it in that organized way.
Sam, I just wanted to interrupt this episode to let you know the 4 ways you can help SMWX. Way number 1, you can invite me to speak at your institution or company. Way number 2, you can advertise on this channel. Way number 3, you can become a member of this channel. The link to the membership is down below. And number 4, you can buy merch, that's books or hoodies. Now let's get back to the episode. All our contact details are in the description box below. In terms of your time in London and in the UK more generally, I was watching a documentary on the BBC, which was about the death of Verwoerd. And you were interviewed on the BBC, and it was a tremendous moment of courage that you expressed when the BBC anchor was basically asking, can you find it in your heart to have sympathy in this moment? And of course, it's easy from this vantage point to say, Verwoerd was a terrible, heinous human being, but they were effectively goading you to express how sorry you were. And you said, of course, the loss of human life is always sad, but I can't find it in myself to express that kind of...
yes, it wasn't exactly like that. Of course, we all condemn the assassination of Dr. Verwoerd. And I said, no, Mr. Day, there's jubilation in the townships. For millions of people in South Africa, a tyrant has fallen.
Yeah.
Of course, assassination doesn't change anything. So it wasn't directly calling upon me to express sadness and horror, but the assumption, all decent people would feel very angry and denounce the assassination. The publishers of my book were a little bit alarmed of the jail diary, because the London Times headed it, "Jubilation in Township," says advocate. And they didn't put in the last part, but assassination doesn't change anything. So I wrote a letter to the Times at their request, saying absolutely correct what they reported. There was jubilation in the townships, but I did add assassination. It's interesting you spotted that.
Yeah. I thought it was a moment of great courage, while showing your sympathy for and the importance of human life. Nonetheless, in that moment, still stating that apartheid was evil and Verwoerd was part of that. I was reading Andre Odendahl's book, A Dear Comrade President, I think, about in some ways Oliver Tambo, but just the constitution making process. And I must say, as someone who's been fascinated and interested in the constitution, I didn't realize to what extent you were called on very early in the constitution making process to be one of the key thinkers, not just in the later stages, but in terms of the ANC's own conception of constitutionalism. What are your memories of those times as the ANC itself was grappling with the need for a constitution in South Africa long before constitutional negotiations had actually begun?
Part of it registered. I was at the Congress of the People, Freedom Charter, that idea. An event almost never spoken about, 1961, when Mandela's underground, he surfaces, South Africa's about to become a republic. And he says, we African people are not against a republic, but we are against the status of our country being changed without our participation. And we demand a national convention of all South Africans to draft a new constitution.
Wow, so it goes back to the 61
1961. So that was, in that sense, part of our tradition. Oliver Tambo himself drafted the 1957 constitution of the ANC. I even once, when he asked me to help update it, I'm kind of chortling, you know, that old constitution has a chaplain general. Now we have a political commissar. Ha, ha, ha. He says to me, some people believe we should go back to the chaplain general. It's a very delicate club, you know. It made me think.
Yeah.
So in that sense, the constitutionalism idea, do things properly, correctly, it's orderly. If you respect the process and decision-making, you do it in a proper way. I, as a lawyer, I'm very critical of law and law's pretensions, and I'm with critical legal studies.
Sure.
You know, showing up so much is bogus, pretending this, that, and the other. It's masking class oppression, gender oppression, other forms of alienation, domination, and so on. We all adored Oliver Tambo. Style, manner, thoughtfulness, and I worked with him on what I regard as the most important legal document of my life, more than the Constitution, more than same-sex marriage's judgment, and that's the Code of Conduct for the ANC. I'm working in Mozambique now. I'm in the Ministry of Justice doing research. The phone rings. Very excited receptionist. President Oliver Tambo wants to speak to you.
Wow.
Hello, Comrade OR, Comrade Albie, and he says, how's your health, the political situation? I'm wondering, what's he want to know?
Yeah.
But African style, step by step. A problem has arisen. Maybe you can help us. Would it be possible for you to take off a week to fly to Lusaka? If it helps, I can speak to President Samora Machel. If you can't do it, I fully understand. Now, normally, you'd get a command from somebody, Comrade Albie, there's a conference in Greenland next week. Be there with a 20-page paper, and you'd find reasons for not going. He says, if you can't do it, we'll fully understand. Take me, you know. And then a little shortly afterwards, I'm flying. The car's taking me down. The office, you had to go down a sanitary lane. It was in the backyard of a small business. Very, very modest building. And now I'm sitting in his room. I think there were fans going overhead, and he's swatting flies.
Wow.
And I'm thinking, the leader of the National Liberation Struggle shouldn't be swatting flies. I don't know what. It just seemed a bit incongruous. Again, he asked after my health and so on and so forth. And finally he said, we have a problem. We have a number of people in our detention who are agents of the enemy, but we have nothing in the ANC statutes about what to do with captured enemy agents. And when I tell the story in England, I say, there's nothing in the Labour Party constitution. What do you do with captured Tories? So very jaunty, I say, the international law instruments that say no cruel, inhuman, degrading punishment or treatment, no torture. He says we use torture. I can't believe it.
Wow.
He says with a bleak face, we're fighting for freedom, we use torture. I heard afterwards, these were the people being tortured in the camps by ANC security. And he'd set up the Stewart Commission that reported that there was, but he didn't tell me, he just said we use torture.
Wow.
And he said we have other problems. And the host countries we're in say, ANC, deal with your own problems. Sexual assault, stealing, driving when they're drunk, stabbing. you deal with it. So he asked me, in effect, to write a code of criminal law and a code of civil criminal procedure for a liberation movement living in exile. And he'd asked somebody else to do it, and the person had picked up the difference in England between felonies and misdemeanors. It was just hopeless. We needed something created for ourselves. So I created a 3-tier system. Problems in the branch deals with it. Crimes, violations of the norms, physical assault, stealing, and so on. You set up a tribunal, charges are put, you have people hearing it, you have a defense, and there's certain penalties available. And then serious crimes against the organization, much more serious. I'm asked to present the Code of Conduct at the Kabwe conference. And I'd say maybe the highest point in my life would be that moment, presenting the Code of Conduct. And the big issue was, is torture permissible in extreme circumstances? And Tambo's position was, he doesn't tell the people, lay down the law. He gets teams to work, come up with something, and it's put to the Congress, and the Congress must decide. And I think that's why I was asked now to present. It didn't come from him or from the National Executive. And a young guy gets up straight away onto the stage. There's a high platform. And he said, no leeway at all. You give the security the tiniest, they never stop there. Another young guy gets up. They were really waiting for this moment. And he said, we're fighting for life. How can we be against life? It was a beautiful moment. That was it. Our fighting for life was much stronger than all the torture, the repression, the violence that came from the regime. It was more binding. It somehow connected us up in such positive ways, more resilient. So the conference decided no torture. It wasn't just an order. He also changed the heads of security and established tribunals. Penal Maduna actually got criticized by security for getting a guy off who'd been sent as a sleeper into the organization. He's a traitor, he's going to... this was now preparing the movement in a way, coming from the top, for the idea of legality. It's not enough. There was a wonderful poet, Mozambican poet, Jorge Rebelo, who wrote a poem in a book called When Bullets Begin to Flower. It's not enough that our cause is pure and just. Justice and purity and justice must exist inside ourselves. So all of that is, in that sense, preparing us morally. But Tambo was a great strategist, and he got a kind of very guarded okay from the Kabwe conference to negotiate when conditions are ripe. So he wouldn't have gone ahead without that. He wouldn't say, I'm the president of the organization, follow me, I know what's best. He needed an aval, he needed a mandate from the structures of the organization there. And shortly afterwards then, the main call that came out was make apartheid unworkable, South Africa ungovernable. The 4 pillars of struggle, which, by the way, I only discovered when Andre was writing the book you're referring to, came about after a visit by Tambo to Vietnam. What's the role of armed struggle? And we had this idea, liberated zones would be created, the masses would rise up, be like the Cubans going up into the mountains, or the Chinese. And the Vietnamese said, no, it's not going to be through armed struggle. Armed struggle is a component of people's struggle. And so we ended up with the 4 pillars.
Right.
And the idea of 4 pillars was to put armed struggle in its place, not to justify it, but to say to be underground resistance, mass mobilization, international support, and armed struggle.
That famous.
So that came out at that stage. And people like nice, simple ways of encapsulating a strategy. But he set up the Constitutional Committee. And the key person in our project was Paulo Jordan. He was head of ANC research. And Tambo said, we're getting constitutions from all over the world for New South Africa.
Yeah.
Give us a report. What's going on here? And Paulo looked at them. All of them actually did dances, the most extraordinary configurations, how to have one person, one vote, with the whites remaining on top, protecting what's called minority rights. The most weird arrangements you could imagine. And what it boiled down to, the key ones coming from South Africa, constitution based on group rights. They're Zulus, they're Afrikaners, they're others, and they must share power. And we would have ended up with 3 presidents, Mandela on Monday and de Klerk on Tuesday and Buthelezi on Wednesday, which is actually going to be a year, ruling, governing by consensus. This was right into 1992. This is why we broke down, actually. And they were going to have an upper house of minority parties. We called it the House of Losers. You lost the vote for the National Assembly, and they would have control over matters of special interest to them, language, maybe land rights and so on. So Paulo came up with the answer to group rights, and the answer was a Bill of Rights. And he said ANC first had a Bill of Rights in 1923. It was very polite, but it was now speaking for all the African people in the southern part of Africa, and fundamental rights for everybody, which meant, in that sense, empowering the people who were denied franchise, land, education were the 3 big issues. 1944, African claims. During World War II, Churchill, Roosevelt, a vision of a post-Hitler world. Now, under a lot of pressure from the Youth League, but Dr. Nomaan and others, African claims with a Bill of Rights, much more pugnacious. And then 1955, the Freedom Charter. So it's not inventing something.
Sure.
It's using something that's part and parcel almost of the DNA of the organization. And Tambo, when he actually got us to meet for the first time, put very heavy emphasis on that long tradition. And he is now taking over from Albert Luthuli, who took over from the others. That sense of he's part of a tradition meant a lot and a huge responsibility for him. And he said, in essence, the Freedom Charter has got the values we want. That must be foundational. The book is a very big book, and Justice Crichler complained it fills the whole page. He likes to write his notes on the page, and it's got lots of footnotes and so on. So I'm not going to try and summarize it, but I can say it was a marvelous period for me. I would come to Lusaka, stay in what was called Andy's Motel, which was on the outskirts. It had an empty swimming pool. We would wonder, would helicopters come flying in with commandos? You kind of looking up into the sky, all the time, and then go and meet at the ANC offices. Wonderful colleagues. First, Jack Simons, who'd been our professor at UCT. And Jack had been asked to teach native law and administration. And he turned it around. He called it Comparative African Government and Law. And that was pre-independence now. In the 1950s, I attended some of his classes. And the map of Africa was red for the British colonies, or pink, green for the French, a kind of orange for the Portuguese colonies, mauve for Belgian Congo. And he dealt with the different forms of oppression, comparing the assimilation policy of the French and the Portuguese, a small class of black people, more French than the French, more Portuguese than the Portuguese, plus natives who don't count at all. The British indirect rule, using the traditional leaders, starting with Shepstone, in fact, in Natal, making that the model for Nigeria and the rest of and a lot of divide and rule. And then apartheid with its own particular variant of the Shepstonian use of traditional authorities. And I still remember him as well, speaking about African law and culture with great feeling, great respect. It's rationality, it's meaning for the society, an orderly way of handling disputes and settling disputes. It was such a blessing for me to pick that up from early on, instead of seeing it as a kind of backwardness that has to be dealt with. So Jack was there at the beginning, then Zola Square took over.
Right.
Now Zola had been at Fort Hare. He'd left to join Mpofu-Walsh. He'd been trained in the Soviet Union, did a PhD in East Germany, and then started working at the OAU, Organization for African Union, in Addis Ababa. I had a soft spot for him because he came from Cape Town, from Simonstown. His family actually had been forcibly removed. And then we had Ted Pekani had done a PhD in Bulgaria. We had 4 PhDs. I'd got a PhD from Sussex, Jack from LSE, one from Leipzig, and one from Sofia. And then Penel Maduna joined us, Jobs Jobatwana from Lesotho, Bridget Mabandla. That was the team. And very early decision, we don't draft a constitution outside. A constitution can only be drafted by the people in South Africa through a constituent assembly set up with a mandate, matter of principle. But at the same time, we give guidance and we can come up with principles. Sure. And we were supported in that by Julius Nyerere, who... and the other big discovery I made when that book was being prepared, because, I'm blown up in hospital in Mozambique. They saved my life in hospital in London. Now I'm writing stuff about a new constitution in London. So I'm out of touch with what's happening in Africa. I discovered the whole story of the writing of the Harare Declaration was new to me. And I find it's new to 99% of South Africans today. And that was the blueprint for our subsequent constitutional content and process. And that was Oliver Tambo behind that. With the support of Nyerere, Kenneth Kaunda, Robert Mugabe came on board. Then it's picked up by the OAU, it goes to the non-aligned movement, accepts it, goes to the Commonwealth. And now Margaret Thatcher is forced to accept what basically was a liberation movement vision, not a vision that starts, how can we protect the whites? It starts with the rights of everybody. And Paulo Jordan's answer, now already in 1985, 1986, a Bill of Rights for South Africa, is our answer to protecting minority rights. The whites are protected not because they're whites, not because they're a minority. Black people get rights not because they're a majority, because they're human beings. We've got to all be human beings in the country. And we wanted religious freedom. We wanted language rights. We wanted freedom of movement. We didn't want post-pass laws. These weren't concessions. These were things that we really wanted. In event, so we encapsulated them in a progressive vision of a Bill of Rights and of a Constitution. Let me, while I'm just freewheeling here, a big moment for me, not as big as presenting the Code of Conduct at Kabwe, but pretty big. I'm asked to speak to the NEC, National Executive of the ANC. What is a constitution? The comrades are very nervous. That's the thing their whites use, to confuse us. And the next thing you know, you're trapped in all their language. So, Comrade Albie, will you explain what a constitution is? So, I'm thinking now, okay, I will present 3 visions of a constitution. There's the classic vision, United States of America, the first great constitution, have separation of powers, and basically it imposes limits on government.
Right, sure.
Then you've got a people's power constitution, such as we had in Mozambique. And it actually puts duties on government, government led by the leading party, that unites all the progressive forces to transform the country and secure rights, enjoyment of rights for everybody. And I know all the comrades are wondering now, we don't want the American Constitution. We need huge change in our country. But this one-party state, and where it's been used in Africa, suppressing the trade unions, suppressing opposition, suppressing the students, it's never been good news in Africa. So I come up with a third prototype, and I call it a post-dictatorship constitution, and to some extent modeled on the constitutions of Italy and France after World War II. And there was a reason for that. The communists and socialists have been very powerful in the resistance to Mussolini and to Hitler. Very influential, not a majority, but when they're writing their constitution, they speak about social justice. It's not just freedom from this, that, and the other, from the state, social justice in both those countries. And I'd worked with an Italian lawyer in Mozambique. She'd come there like left-wing people from all over the world. And she said, our constitution, it's not applied, but the constitution requires change for social justice. It was also after Portugal had overthrown the dictatorship. And again, communists and socialists, very powerful in the resistance, maybe even a majority. An open society, multi-party democracy, fundamental freedoms, but very strong social programs, very strong workers' rights. In Nicaragua, they'd overthrown the Somoza dictatorship, and there were 4 different opposition groups. Sandinistas best known. They came together with a common program of principles. So I'm thinking about all these experiences, and what we need in South Africa then is a post-dictatorship constitution that doesn't just get rid of the dictatorship, but all the social structures created, supported by, and entrenched by the dictatorship. So I speak about that third, and I knew, that's what people would go for. We didn't take a vote. It was just the vision of a constitution as an emancipatory document, but that went for an open society. The Freedom Charter speaks about fundamental human rights. It says the people shall govern, but it presupposes a multi-party democracy with very strong economic and social transformatory aspects. And I'll just wrap up this little bit now with my own, I can even call it conversion. I've got another whole bunch of stories about going to China in 1954, but being in raptures with the Chinese Revolution. Then Mao Zedong doing strange things, horrible loss of life, I'm not so sure. I come to Mozambique, it's the revolution. Wow, it's fantastic, it's solving the problems, this is the way to go. Socialism works. And then the problems start accumulating. And then I see, and we all see, if there's no space for opposition, it doesn't go away. It goes underground, it gets picked up by external forces, you have civil war. Now, I lost an arm. There are thousands of Mozambicans without legs because of landmines. There were hundreds of thousands of people died. Millions of refugees, internal and external. Child soldiers. It wrecked that country. And when I arrived the first time in Mozambique and I saw a soldier with a gun, I felt such a glow, a gun on our side. A gun that's not pointing at us, it's on our side. When I was wheeled out 11 years later, semi-comatose, there's a soldier with a gun at the airport, not the same soldier, standing 11 years. And I say, no more guns. We've got to find another way. Even revolutionary war, we've got to find a way without war. So when we came back to South Africa, and the comrades are meeting us, they're all excited, but what's this negotiations? We're waiting for the revolution. And those of us who'd been connected with the Mozambican revolution are saying, we've got to find another way. We've got to be smarter, more in touch with the people, closer to their needs, provide better leadership than the right wing. So that's a kind of following multiple paths, giving you some idea, the Albie who's speaking to you now.
Absolutely.
Emotions that I'm recalling, and recalling them with pride. Pride in what we believed in, pride in the adaptations we were able to make, pride in what we accomplished, the constitutional order that we got, pride in getting at least the whites to lay down their guns and to stop their control of the administration without that terrible bloodshed. And we could have gone on fighting. We would have won in the end. There wouldn't have been a South Africa. We would have inherited a ruined country. So it's taking long, so long. It's so slow, so. But huge changes have been made. And the problem now, in fact, with me is not to get me to talk, but to get me to shut up.
Not at all, and I'm fascinated by the insights and just loving hearing about this history, which is so important. Of course, now there's perhaps intensified debate around the Constitution. There are various critical voices questioning the liberatory potential of the Constitution. I've even added my own preliminary ramblings to that debate, although studying law, I think maybe I painted in brushstrokes that were too broad. Do you see the Constitution as a liberatory document, and in what ways do you see it as a document of emancipation and liberation?
Yes, maybe I would use the word emancipatory, although our struggle was a national liberation struggle. As emancipatory, it doesn't in itself liberate, but it provides mechanisms for emancipation. It prevents returning to grotesque and horrible methods of domination control, which sadly progressive people when they're in power, could go in for all that easily.
Yeah.
And there have been immense changes, but it also enables us to handle our internal stresses and conflicts. And in that sense, not everything works in South Africa, but by and large, our constitution has worked in the sense of containing the political forces, the contending positions that people have, and holding government to account to a considerable extent. I had no doubt that if the ANC came below 50%, it would accept the result. It was in the DNA of our generation. When the ANC lost Johannesburg, lost Pretoria, lost Port Elizabeth, Kaberga, and accepted. And also the ANC from the beginning, Western Cape, KZN. One of the problems in Mozambique is that Frelimo hasn't allowed any form of regional government in other hands. Couldn't be right. There's huge support for Renamo in the central provinces. It couldn't be right. And now people are being killed in the streets because they're protesting against the elections, against the outcome. So in that sense, creating the Independent Electoral Commission, choosing the commissioners in a particular way, the court itself supervising the IEC, a case that's not spoken about enough was the Tlokwe case, when the issue was allegation that the ANC had bussed in local government elections supporters from outside into the wards. The wards don't matter in general national elections, the provinces a little bit. And the answer was, well, the numbers are so small, they wouldn't have affected the outcome. The court said it's not just a question of numbers, it's trust in the electoral process. You've got to do it correctly, and you can't justify a result simply on the basis of the mathematics. So it's features like that, but coupled with strong media, critical, investigative journalists, civil society organizations, and I think lots of people who've been around for a long time with deep values who are not grabbing fruit for themselves, but who want to retain something of that spirit, found in many parties and sometimes completely outside of political parties. I think in that sense the Constitution has stood up very, very well.
Fam, you asked for some SMWX merch and we have delivered. I know you're always looking for ways to help support and grow this channel, so why don't you buy yourself an SMWX hoodie? Super comfy, super warm, and you can represent SMWX. You can check the link down below for how to buy your SMWX hoodie and help build and grow this channel so we can bring you more interviews, more analysis, and more educational insights. Now let's get back to it. And in studying law, I think one starts to realize the way that the court, the Constitutional Court, has interpreted the Constitution in various directions and in ways that constitute genuine, in my view, often unambiguous moral progress. And one cannot deny that, it's easy to take those things for granted when you have them. But when you read the history of a case and you think to yourself, for someone in my generation, goodness me, so that was actually up for grabs. That was a debate. One does get that sense, and I, in my own thinking around the Constitution, I'm coming to a place where I think that there are certain things that we should be triumphalist about. And it's perfectly okay to be triumphalist about. There may be other things which we are on the fence about and skeptical about, and then yet other things where we think amendment is necessary. And actually we can hold all of those views at different times about different parts, rather than these broad condemnations of the entire thing and its entire history, or broad celebrations of the entire document. It's a document that has a complex history which can be celebrated and questioned at the same time, I think.
Yes, I would accept that. I think there are moments where one's entitled to be triumphant. Triumphalism is something different.
Sure.
So I was shocked looking at our son's history book, and it deals with the transition from apartheid to democracy. And April the 27th is squeezed in as this happened, that happened, voted, What? You know, that was such a majestic day. The people standing in line, it's a dream of decades of old man brought in a wheelbarrow to vote before he died. It's huge, and the textbook just, that's a day for beating drums, blowing trumpets, where in other countries a flag goes down, a new flag comes up, and the new anthem is played, and everybody applauds. 20 million people took part in that day in South Africa. So, yes, shout it aloud, shout it aloud, shout it aloud, be very, very proud. But triumphalism then is a way where that snuffs out negatives and failures, and I think that's to be avoided. We worked very hard on the court. I had marvelous colleagues. I don't know if you ever saw the film 12 Angry Men.
No.
It was a very famous film about the jury, and one juror refuses to convict. In the end, they all. And of course, today you couldn't show it because it's only men, it's only white men. Right. The film isn't popular anymore. But the body language, the style. Laurie Ackerman, I'm up here now to commemorate at the court his passing. Very quiet, thoughtful. He would get into position and then come out with his question. Ismail Muhammad, quick, brilliant, sharp, hardly giving counsel a chance. John Didcot with his powerful, booming voice.
Yeah.
And then Cato Regan, not shouting at all. Yvonne Mahoro, counsel, you know, there's something that's troubling me a little bit, maybe you can help. That's in the court. And then round the table, magnifying all these different things. But very dedicated. And we had no points of reference. We couldn't use the decisions of the old apartheid courts. I couldn't accept the reasoning of the courts. If the cases they dealt with, pure legal principle, but dealt with the past laws. The foundation was so ugly and horrid, you know. I said, no, we can't say what Van den Heever said in that particular case, even though the technical point was transferable. So the Constitution spoke about the values of an open democratic society, and referring to law in open and democratic societies and decisions and international law. So these are pointers. And then we found, interestingly, early on, Namibia was important. Ismail Muhammad had been the Chief Justice there, and Zimbabwe under Dumbuchena, but mainly Canada, very, very useful, and India were the two countries we drew on the most. Canada the most. They had a new Bill of Rights in Canada, and most of our work was about the Bill of Rights. Very thoughtful, modern judges in Canada. But we didn't use it as precedent. We looked for philosophy, reasoning, methodology. US, amazing judges, some very clever judges, very right-wing. but majorities, minorities, this way and that, we didn't want to be drawn into there. So we would cherry pick, if you like, something that a judge had said elsewhere that explained our constitution, helped us to apply our constitution. It picked up on the core values of our constitution. So we spent hours and hours and hours, New Zealand, Australia, the German Federal Constitutional Court, the European Court of Human Rights, the African courts, courts for Latin America, whatever we could get from that. But we laid a platform, a methodology, a style of work, a set of principles. Now the court can push it a bit further here, pull back a bit there. Once or twice they even agree with Albie Sachs in a minority judgment. Hooray! Hooray, hooray. That's happened actually twice. And I'm actually enthusiastic about the court today.
In what ways?
And it's my heart speaking. The court's much closer to the people than we were. We believed in the constitutional values, and all of us were profoundly anti-apartheid, and all were at least social democratic. We had no, what today's called neoliberal, people seeing somehow that freedom to do what you damn well like, just let people get on with it. None of us had that approach. And the text of the Constitution, social and economic rights, very powerful gender rights, very broad concept of unfair discrimination, reaching lots of different sectors of society. So the text was very activist, proactive, made it easier, but it didn't require the text. The reason why the people were chosen for the court was they'd been resisting apartheid. Some, like Pius Langa, had been in the underground resistance. Ismail Mohammed only worked in the courts, but he was in touch with the liberation movement, all the time. Arthur Chasselson had given up very lucrative legal practice to set up Legal Resources Center. Totally different methodology, different vision of the advocate, not as this lone figure fighting single-handed to get justice, but part of a team, working with a team to help, in particular, the poor, the marginalized, and so on. So all of these factors sort of were coming together then. And what the court's got today then is I would write about apartheid. Okay, I'd suffered under the repression of apartheid. I hadn't experienced life under apartheid. I would write about patriarchy. I hadn't been in a patriarchal family kind of set up, where it had... my mom was an independent woman and her friends were independent. Now we've got people on the court, in that sense, representative of the whole nation, who've lived through these things, and so much depends on not just the outcome, how you tell the story, and telling the story with a register, a focus, a tone that clicks. I would say the present court is doing that. I don't want to single out particular individuals. There's some particularly smart, legally astute members on the court, but a good level of reasoning. We get the briefings, which, by the way, it was Richard Goldstone and I, when the press were getting the stories completely wrong, and you couldn't blame them, 100-page with 5 different judgments going all over the place and funny legal language. So we did press summaries. And I would agree, I'd say 9 out of 10 or maybe 19 out of 20 with the decisions, just in terms of my intuition, what's right or wrong. But I like the feeling that the court is now more viscerally, umbilically, if you like, connected with the majority of the population.
Certainly. I know that your time is at a premium, so I'll just ask one last question. In your judicial life, there's so many interesting cases. You've spoken about minority judgments which have been elevated. I think of Prince, which is a fascinating minority judgment of yours. Laugh It Off is a literary classic, if let alone a legal classic. Was it August, I think, where prisoners or incarcerated persons' rights were protected? This was the heyday of incredible legal and moral, in some ways, moments for our country, setting the foundation. Is there any of your judgments, whether ones that I've mentioned or others, that you look back on particularly fondly?
Often would be asked, what's your favorite judgment? I say the one I'm writing now. And it's interesting, actually. The minute you'd finished, it's out, you forget it. It's as though you've got to almost expel it from your system to get ready for the next one. I've actually been giving comments on all my judgments for the Albie collection.
Yes.
There's something wrong with Amal and George Clooney. They decided to give the Albie Awards for people who fought for justice.
It's absolutely amazing.
Smart Albie decided, I can take advantage of this to build the Albie collection. And so we filmed interviews.
Wonderful.
With Dundee Matthews, discussing with me all the judgments I've written.
Right.
And just yesterday I was looking at one.
Oh, wow.
And it's a case, I forget even the name, but it was Kada Asmal on the Constitutional Committee with me. Old friend, occasional competent, sparky, brilliant. We wrote the first draft of a Bill of Rights on his kitchen table in Dublin, and now he's Minister of Education, and he issues an instruction to public schools and private schools: no child can enter a school until they're in the year when they turn 7, and the private schools are up in arms, and in particular, parents of a kid in King David School. Now, I'm from the Jewish community. I know the emphasis on education. You start prenatally, to create a little Einstein. The mother listens to Brahms and Beethoven. That's the way it's sold. To say you have to wait till you're 7, was ridiculous. Huge issues were raised. The rights of the child. But that can cover everything. The rights of private schools. When can the minister interfere? And I thought, we don't have to go there. We don't have to lay down the law on these big issues, on such a tangential issue. And I'm saying to myself, if I try really hard, I can write a boring judgment, technical and formal.
Yeah.
I'll show to the world I really can if I put my mind to it.
Yeah.
So I found he had quoted the wrong section. And normally, if you say the right thing but you give it the wrong number, the courts will say that's too bad.
Sure.
But it was actually the wrong section. He didn't have the power under that section. So I had pleasure then. And Kada was in court and sending notes to his counsel in yellow paper, and the counsel was getting all flustered. I just spoke about it the other day. It's not my favorite case, but it's one that amused me a lot.
Yeah.
I put a lot into the Rastafari case. I
Yes,
felt so much,
Prince, yeah.
so much for this guy. Partly, he was standing at the back of the court with long dreadlocks and brightly coloured knitted wear, and almost like he's saying, why does everybody look at us? And then, worse than that, take it easy. Let go. Tomorrow's another day. Now I'm driven. And he's saying, Albie, you're wasting your time. It's a much better way of living than being a judge deciding on my fundamental rights. But he was willing to give up a career as a lawyer for his beliefs. And that reached me very, very deeply. And I've only smoked dacha once in my life. It was in California on Easter weekend, and I did inhale. So I'm not a smoker, but I just felt that at least a religious exemption ought to be granted, just something acknowledging that these are not just weirdos. And if the big religions like Catholicism during Prohibition could have the communion wine, then the small upstart religions should have something. So that moved me quite a lot. Another one where I was in a minority, and now the court has come round, was the one Foulkes and Robinson dealing with the rights of cohabitant women, not to where you could only get maintenance from the man's estate, if you've been legally married, and there's nothing in the will, and majority of people in South Africa, there are no wills, and there's so many families that are set up, they function. The woman partner bears the children, looks after the house, makes the sandwiches, is not earning anything herself, nurses him when he's sick, and then in the end, she's not even entitled to maintenance. I feel that's unfair discrimination on grounds of marital status. And my judgment was twice as long as Tembele Skwiya's judgment, saying, if you're married, you're under a duty to support your partner, so it makes sense on your death, you're under that duty. I think last year the court turned around and said they were wrong.
Well, Judge Albie, thank you so much for joining us on SMWX, for sharing your considerable insights, experiences, emotions, and thank you for your contribution to our country, to its constitution, and to its literary eminence, but probably most importantly also to its sense of humor.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Like, share, subscribe, comment down below, and keep it locked on SMWX. Aye.